when you do the flex function, I would write it out and I do it early. You don't make it out so inside each variable.
So I basically just let you know whenever you're ready. Roll with these guys. You don't have to do it at a time or when you run time.
I'm good, man. I've got a link. And it's already streaming, so
You're just gonna follow the critical stuff. That's all.
yeah, the critical and the high stuff.
Cool.
That's it.
That would be easy, pretty straightforward class.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we're gonna go ahead and get started. I'm not Duran. Do y'all remember Duran's not here this week? Hopefully he doesn't get captured in Cancun or wherever the hell he went. Makes it back safely, or else I'm gonna have to go save his ass. So today we're gonna run class a little bit differently for Monday and Wednesday, because these guys are better at React than I am. So I'd love Carson to kind of like lead class because he's in it all day, every day. I think you'll get more value than me just kind of going through it and us having an open discussion with Carson and Alex on the side. I do want you guys to ask questions that you need to ask. If he's saying something too technical, or we want it to be user-friendly, dumbed down, please tell us, right? This is the only way Carson's gonna learn. He's a hardcore tech guy, so he tends to speak in tech terms. So don't just nod your head if you don't have no idea what the hell he's talking about. The other thing too, just so you guys are aware, I'm trying to schedule sometime during the projects to bring some people in to do interviews. This kind of reminder, like I did on Saturday. We'll put together a list for people who want that. Depending on how many people sign up on the list, I may do it 2 Saturdays in a row. So yeah, that's just heads up there. Anything else from you guys' side?
Not that I can think of.
Nothing else? I'm missing. Does anyone have any questions before we get started? No, everyone's cool. So I like to start my class. Some of you guys are aware of this, some of you not. So like this to 5 of your day, 0 being this was the worst day of my life. I don't know why I'm still alive in here. 5 being it was beautiful. There was unicorns flying around. Where is your day? 0 to 5. 5s? Man, we got a lot of unicorns and a couple people had shitty days. So this is good for you because you can like take a glance at the class and be like, okay, this person's having a bad day. Hopefully they don't ask me a question. But I'll be here during class, so but Carson, go take over. Thanks again, man.
Cool, no problem. So thankfully, this isn't my first time since I taught the other Saturday, so you guys are lucky. You get to skip the guinea pig phase. I kind of got it figured out. Today's a really busy day because it's supposed to be Saturday. We're still on the weird offset schedule, so we're going to get as much done as we can. If you have questions, feel free to ask them. You know, we're not going to mind answering questions just because we have to go fast. By all means, we just want everyone to totally understand what we're going through because React's tough. So really quickly, we're going to do a recap of what we've gone over in React so far. So if you know the answer, you can go ahead and shout it out. It's like, this is the interactive portion of class. So what are the building blocks of a React application? Components. Awesome. That was quick, man. Components. That's what it is. See, look at how fancy this is. There's an exclamation point. It's really happy. So components are really nice because they allow us to split out the UI into really small, reusable, refactorable, testable pieces. And that is really helpful as your application grows in complexity. They're really simple because they're just JavaScript functions that represent UI. So if you want your entire React stack to be completely functions, you can. It's not that hard to do. We organize our components in a tree-like structure similar to the HTML DOM. So that part's pretty familiar, and hopefully that makes it a little easier to learn React. So an example of how your app might look in a graph would be something like this. We have one master component called the app. It's pretty common to see that. And then you might have like a to-dos, which is a list of to-dos, and that'll have some to-dos in it. And these are all different components. And then your app might also have a user component. Maybe that's your profile. Maybe that's just a username. Hey, welcome, Carson. Awesome. But this is a very nice visual representation of how it might look. Components, again, really powerful. They're small. They're reusable. They're really flexible. If you need to go find where to change something, it's usually easy to find that. They're really a fantastic architecture for building complicated web apps or simple web apps, however you want to look at it. But in my opinion, and I know Alex is the same way, React is second to none. It's great. So what is the name of the HTML-like markup syntax we use to describe the UI our components should produce? JSX. That's exactly right. Good job, everybody. Let's do a Duran's round of applause. There you go. So funny story. When I was doing the other class, I kept saying round of a hand. Like, instead of give them a hand. And they're all like, this guy's an idiot. So JSX, it's a preprocessor step. Basically what that means is before your code runs, there's something in React that goes through and looks for all your JSX and parses it out, turns it into actual HTML components, or just strings that your JavaScript will then know how to turn into HTML. And while it looks like HTML, it's not. It's XML, which is extensible markup language. We don't use XML a whole lot in this class, but it's good to know about it. And the React documentation can tell you a little bit about the gotchas that React has, because there are some. It's kind of weird. So there's this live demo. I was playing with these before class started, and they really suck. But I'm going to try to just show you how they work. For anyone streaming, if things are hard to see or small, I'll try to make them look bigger, but I can only do so much, especially because I'm on Linux. So you can type some stuff in here, and you can see the project name starts changing. And this is pretty much how React works when you actually have it in a project. You can change stuff on the fly, and the JavaScript's going to re-render it really quickly, and it's going to be like, you know, it just happens. You're like, wow, what happened? The page isn't reloading. Like, it's amazing. It's so fast. I mean, you've seen this all before with some React and a little bit of handlebars, but it's pretty awesome. This is the nature of the single-page application, that it just renders really quick. So I like that a lot. How can we embed JavaScript expressions or values inside of JSX? Does anyone know? Curly braces. Nice, Darnell. Let's give him a round of applause. JSX curly braces. That's exactly right. The curly braces can be used inside of JSX code in order to embed JavaScript expressions, and they're very similar to handlebars. So they shouldn't be that scary. They are a little bit. They're slightly different in how they work under the hood. So if you ever want to know how that works, I'll be more than happy to fill you in. But just know that that's how you put values directly in your JSX. And here's a live demo. We have this React is that you can see is inside of the curly braces, and that's what we're rendering is a direct value into our JSX, and I can change it up here. Whoa, awesome, you know, just like that. So it's pretty straightforward. Once you get comfortable with this curly brace syntax, pretty easy to pretty much put whatever you want in React. So that's another really nice thing. So what is the primary means by which we pass data down into React components? Anyone know this one? Cody? Props? Nice. There you go. That deserves some props. Props. We're actually going to talk a lot about props today. Props are pretty much like function arguments for your React components. And that's a really good way to look at them, because that's, at the end of the day, what they are. Usually use props to pass from your parent element all the way down through your children, and then it can render all of those like you would normally HTML. And they can be looked at as attributes of HTML elements too. So we're all familiar with input type, or maybe class, or style, or what say you. They can be viewed very similarly to that. They can be considered immutable. Does anyone know what immutable means? You can't change them. That's exactly right. Immutability is a beautiful thing. You'll learn to love it the further you get in your career. And props can be used to change the default behavior of a component. And that kind of makes sense, right? You're passing new values in. Maybe you use some logic when you're rendering your React component. It changes what it does. So that's a really powerful part of React, is this props tree going all the way down from your parent to your children. So here's a live demo. Here's some props right here. And you can see type danger. And it's displaying in red when it's danger. And I can change this, hopefully. Green. Wow. All right, to success, sorry. And now, wow, it's green. So that's an example of props. You can see it looks like an attribute on the React component alert, but it's really not. It's effectively a function argument. And that's what's amazing about React. It looks like I'm writing HTML. I'm really writing functions. That's weird, but it's cool. It works. So what library and method do we use to render our application's root component to the DOM? Does anyone know? React DOM.render. Nice. Good job. Great. Let's do it. We're gonna clap. We're gonna clap a lot, so I know you guys are paying attention. So React DOM.render is a separate library. The React DOM is a separate library from the base React library. And it's basically just methods for working with the DOM. Render, there's a few others in there. Frankly, you'll only really use render. There might be a couple others, like I think you can get inputs information from it and stuff, but don't do that. Render is a single root component to the virtual DOM, and then it starts to act like real HTML. So usually you'll see maybe a div tag with an ID root or something, and you'll bind it to that root, and voila, you've got magical HTML. So we went through that fast. Does anyone have any questions about anything we've gone over with React so far before we move on? It's okay if you do. Like, this is really complicated. So, no? Well, awesome. I'll go ahead and move on. Here, this is fun. Time to code. That's awesome, right? Gosh, you guys like me less than the other class. And I work here the whole time. Okay. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go through and demo a little bit with props here. Let me just open up my workspace. Drag it over. Visual Studio Code. As you all probably know, I'm a big proponent of code. Index.js, and let me just run this in my browser really quick. So here's the part where I really want you all to ask questions if you've got them. It starts to get really complicated from here on out, so we'll go through this step by step and we'll explain it all. So first of all, does anyone not remember the project structure or the similar project structure or how this all works? Does anyone have any questions on just how, like what you see here on my left-hand side in the tree? What's up? So it's kind of a misnomer to call React MVC. React in and of itself is just the view portion of it, just what you're rendering on the UI. MVC is model view controller. So you can think of React as just the V. So, right, you're correct. We're just doing the view. So for the streamers, Trent's question was, we're not really doing MVC yet, correct? And the answer is correct. We're not doing MVC. We're just doing the V of MVC, the view. React has some other libraries that we might look at if we have time, like Redux, that help you do the state behind the scenes. And you get a little bit more MVC-like functionality. But React itself is just for view rendering. So no one else has any questions. And I'm letting Alex field questions from general. So right here we have our index.js, and this is where we have the React DOM render, where we bind to some element in the index HTML. Like in this case, it's a div with ID root. We've gone over this before. So let's talk a little bit about props. Does anyone have a question on this before I move on? Anyone else want to clarify anything about React DOM render, how it works? Nope. Cool. So we have this sweet app.js, and if we go back to the index.js, you can see the app imported in here, right? And then it's the element that we're rendering in. So what's cool about this? Well, for one, it's a function, and two, it's returning another React component. And here we're going to talk a little bit about these props. So we have this cool attribute looking thing here called type, set equal to danger. And that looks like it's an attribute, like I said earlier, but it's actually a function argument for the alert type. We also, believe it or not, have this invalid password or username. This is just a string that you'd render in maybe like a p tag or something. So not too unfamiliar, but it actually gets rendered as props as well. It's called children. So it's automatically added to your props object, props.children, and you get every element that's nested inside of the parent element. So say you have an unordered list, a UL, and you have 10 LI items in there, you'd have props.children would be an array of 10 list items, right? So it's intuitive once you understand how it works. Understanding what these props do in the beginning is it's pretty difficult. So let's look at the alert class and see how these props work. So again, all the React components, just functions. Simple as that. They take in one thing, an object called props. Here's our object called props. If we look down a little further, we have our props.type. Again, if we go back here, we have type, danger, Then we have props.type. Can anyone guess what that's going to be? Danger. Absolutely. Simple as that. Like, it looks like an attribute, but realistically, we are passing it into this function. Like, that's crazy. And that's what this JSX is used to do. Well, it's .js here, but the JSX as well. They're rendered by React as functions, and everything you put in there as the attributes, it says, oh, this must be a property. I'm going to go ahead and pass it in as props. So the other thing that I was mentioning was children. And you can see here, props children is just in these curly braces, so it's going to be rendered as a literal. Right here, we're passing invalid password or username directly into the alert component. Boom, props.children. Boom, here's the children. Boom, there they are again, just in case you didn't see it first time. So that's a really brief explanation of props and how they work. This is a very simple way that props work, but at its heart, this is React. This is all we're really doing. We want to pass props from the very parent element all the way down to the children so we can change how the app looks. So does anyone have any questions on the code before I move on? What's up, Trent? These double pipes right here?
Yeah. Well, what I'm going to
Right. So JavaScript, Trent's question was these two double pipes, this double pipe right here, the logical OR that we've used before in if statements and stuff. How is that used with this success? And the answer is JavaScript has some quirky hacks. One of them is this double pipe, which you'll see a lot as you get more familiar with JavaScript, especially in a professional setting, where if the thing on the left is null or empty, it automatically sends back the thing on the right. So it's called null coalescing in technical terms, but realistically, just say, hey, is the first thing empty? If it is, give me the second thing. And it's a nice way to assign default values. So sometimes you might have user input you want, and you're like, oh, hey, well, I want the user to type their age. If they put nothing, I'm just going to put 0. Well, you could check for the user input and say or 0, right? And so if they didn't put anything, it's going to be null. So that's all that is. It looks way more confusing than it is, and JavaScript's full of fun little hacks like this. They're really hard to read, but once you get them, they're quick, they're easy, they're dirty. So yeah, that's what the double pipes are. So I'd get familiar with it. It's a pretty cool little trick. What's up, Cody?
So the pair of curly braces around the props type and success, is that just telling it that that's like a separate JavaScript thing compared to like the main statement? Because it's already wrapped.
Right. So Cody's question was, we have this internal curly braces around props type or success. How does React know that that's different than the outer curly braces? React itself doesn't necessarily know that. So the first set right here says, hey, this is going to be a React value. And thus, you can see the tick marks here, right? So you remember what the tick marks are for with the string? Yeah, the tick marks are what? Someone tell me? It's like a, what was that, Jesse? It's sort of like another set of parentheses, yeah, where you can take a value and inject it directly into a string called string interpolation. And that's basically like string 1 plus string 2 plus other part of string, right? Just embedded right into it. So this is just your typical JavaScript syntax. Remember, inside the curly braces for React, you can put any JavaScript syntax, as long as it's valid. Darnell, did you have a question?
Yeah, so is alert an object?
So Darnell asked, is alert an object? Alert is a function, right? So it's equal to, you could change this right here. Does that make it better? Yeah, it's like the, you guys remember the anonymous functions, right? It's an anonymous function in this case. We don't need to give it anything else other than just the function definition. And then we export it out. That's all React is, just functions. Your question, Ben?
Yeah, the $sign, how are we implementing that? Where does that come from? Is that a React?
This $sign? The $sign that's in the alert. So Ben asked, what is this $sign? Is that something to do with React? Maybe a library like jQuery? The answer is, that is your JavaScript syntax for string interpolation again, adding the strings. Remember, when you have the ticks, you use $ curly braces to say whatever's in these curly braces is going to be directly added to the string. So it's kind of confusing because we're on the front end. It's going to remind you of jQuery a bit. It's not jQuery. Don't let it confuse you. It's something different. I get that. That's weird. Tim?
Just to piggyback on that, there are times like when you don't use the $, right?
If you want to do times you don't use $ when?
Kind of on the whole string interpolation, right? Like that's also with the backticks. There's times where you just throw it in the curly braces. Am I wrong?
So Tim's question was, if you have the backticks, do you need the $, basically, or can you just use the curly braces? And if you want your value to be transformed from a value into the string based off of like a variable or something, you need the $.
Oh,
If you were to just put the curly braces, it becomes part of the string.
Oh.
You see there, I deleted the $. The syntax highlighting is even different. So it becomes something totally different if you forget that $. It's no longer string interpolation. It's now just a string. Any more questions on any of this? Cool. Well, I have it running, so I'm going to drag it over. So all this is like we saw in that live demo, a fun little message here, invalid username or password, right? And remember, that's the child that we passed in. Let me go ahead and I'll make this smaller so we can see all of it together. So we had that child value, right? Invalid username and password passed in. And then we have our alert function, and it's rendering right here. So what can we do to show the power of props? Well, just like I did in the live demo, go ahead and change that to success. Wow, now it's green. That's amazing. So the type changed, and we can actually, let's go ahead and open our console. We have a console log of props here, right? So let's go ahead and reload. So here's the props. Type success, children, invalid password or username. Exactly what we would expect based off of what we saw when we're talking about the props. Change this back to danger. Right? Boom. You can see here the props changed again. Danger. And then the children are still the same. Let's change the children. Is really cool. It's the only way anyone ever tells me that is when I tell myself something. Thanks, Jesse. I like it. So, children, Carson is really cool. Type danger. So this is kind of an example of how the props change on the fly. We're using Create React App with this, and we've all used that already, right? So remember that it has like special code to reload it, hot reload it for you. It's pretty sweet. But this is basically what would happen if I was running this app and changing the props programmatically. Like I had, a button that I could press that would change the Carson is really cool to, invalid username, password, or whatever I wanted to say, right? It would do the same thing on the fly for you. It would just change it in React. And that's all through the props. So that's a little bit about props. Tim, you had another question?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, that's cool.
If type is empty, does that become green because of the double pipes?
That's a great question. Why don't we see? Yes. Type becomes empty. Does it become green because of the double pipes? And the answer is yes. And we just saw that. That was a really good thing to pick up on, Tim. So that's an example of what the logical OR operator does right there. Now it's just going to default to success. If I put something that's not anything in there, what's going to happen? If I put, just random stuff. Anyone know what's going to happen? Is it going to be green? Is it going to be an error? What color is it going to be? Spence is killing us all. Oh, you get nothing. You get nothing. And the reason why is that's not a valid alert type in Bootstrap. We're using Bootstrap behind the scenes here. So it's just stuff. I guess it would have helped if I told you that. But yeah, we're using Bootstrap behind the scenes. And these are alert types in Bootstrap. So danger, warning, success. There's probably some other ones. It's primary, something like that. Right? So cool. But remember, the double OR is only on null or empty values. So you're not going to go from DADS, AD, or whatever it was, to success because there's a value there. It's just some weird garbage value that doesn't make sense. So cool. That's a little bit on props. Any more questions on this before we move on? Ben, what's up?
So essentially, we are doing all the work on the server, so I'm not having to refresh the page on the front end. I'm not having a client having to do a refresh the actual page. Because
So
I'm just rebuilding, I'm sending it to them, and the page is going to have to update.
that's a really good question. So Ben asked, are we basically doing all the work on the server, and now the client has to do no work because it's just refreshing for him? It's actually the exact opposite. So we're taking advantage of the client in this case because we want the client to do all the rendering without having to talk back to the server. So what's cool about it is if you want your app to seem very responsive, seem very quick, the biggest problem with that is when you have to talk back with the server, it's got to go all the way to wherever your server is physically. Like, you know, I may be in Arizona, but your server may be in New York. I mean, light can only go so fast, right? So we're going to have some delay. And then there's going to be network traffic and all that. So that's going to take time. That means when those pages refresh, I'm going to have to wait. I'm going to see the white screen. I'm going to go, it's taking forever. With React, it's happening on the client right then, right there. So it renders as fast as your computer will render it. The only difference is the data, you can use the data, get it from wherever you want, right? So that's what single page applications, that's what makes them really cool, is the client is now doing a lot more of the work than the server was. In Handlebars is where the server does all the work. Because Handlebars is actually, the server is replacing those values in the templates with values on the server. So that's how they differ in that regard. React is made to leverage the fact that they don't have to make trips back to the server to make it seem like it's way faster, more responsive app. Plus, when you're working with just JavaScript, you can do a lot more. But that's an excellent question because that really raises the, why is React here? Why do we use React? Why do we care about all this fancy React stuff? And that's why. Anything else before we move on? Nope. Cool. So let me close this bad boy. So if this were a Saturday class, the next thing we would do would be a little assignment. But because it's not a Saturday class and we have to go as quick as we can, I'm just going to kind of go over this with y'all. So I think this will probably work. Let me just look at this real quick. Okay. So I'm going to run this code, show you what the final output is. Again, this was a create React app. Sorry, I didn't shut the other one down, and we all know what happens when that happens. Freaks out, man. All right, so this one is really kind of funky. So it's kind of hard to see. But we have 19 plus 142 equals 161 in this crazy big font. 42 minus 17 equals 25 in a smaller font. 100 times 3 in a huge font, 300. And 96 divided by 4 is 24, and again, a smaller font. So that's just an example of how this code we're about to look at would render if you were to run it. So let's go ahead and look at the code. Again, we have our index.js. Pretty cool. And our app.js just renders this calculator component. Okay, so let's look at the calculator component. This one is a bit more complex. We have a bunch of moving parts here. Again, it's just a function. So it's nothing too terrifying in terms of what the JavaScript construct is, but it's a pretty complicated React component. Does anyone want to try to explain what they think is going on here? Maybe we can walk through it together, go over what the props are, or rather, does anyone want to try to explain this without looking at the math component, what they think it might be doing? Anyone want to take a crack at it? Jesse, what's up?
Okay.
Do it.
So math number one is just signaling that the operator is the symbol that's being used to, I guess, do something to the transition. And number two, which is 142, so it's just adding number 142. Is that what you're trying to do?
Yes. So do you know how that will look in the props?
Do I know how that's going to look in the props?
So you're exactly right about what it's going to do. How's it going to look in the props?
Okay. I don't know how to do it.
Well, we'll look at it.
Okay.
It's kind of confusing, I know, especially since we have different kinds of props going on here. So we can see number 1 is a number. Operator is a string, it appears, but it's not in curly braces, right? That's kind of weird. And number 2, again, curly braces is a number. And it's the same for all of those. And then we also have this. We just have this, what? Is this a string? What is this? Is this HTML? I don't know. It's just kind of there. So it's kind of a weird component. So why don't we look at the math component too? We'll look at them, see if we can look at them together without it being too jumbled on the screen. I don't really like that all that much. Never mind. We're going to look at them one at a time. Okay. So math component. Again, it's just a function, but this time it's got props. The calculator, no props. You don't need props. You can have them if you want to. You don't need them though. Math definitely has props. And it also has this value. So one interesting thing about this one that the other components didn't really show as well is the fact that this is literally just a function. We have a let statement right here. So obviously we're going to be manipulating something. We're going to get some value, assign it to this value parameter, this value variable, and then we're going to render it, I suppose. So, Jesse, now that we see how this function is, we get the props in, right? We have number 1, operator, and number 2.
And so it's, can we go back to the calculator?
Of course.
So, okay, so just trying to see what the values on this is. If the value equals props, that number 1 plus the props, that number 2.
Right, so we've got this value here.
Right.
So you can see it's got the let in front of it. So we're just creating the variable, right?
Yeah.
And then we're going to do stuff to it. We have a props num1, props num2. And remember, if we go back to the calculator, we have num1 and num2.
Right.
That's where it's coming from, and they're just numbers.
Okay.
Then we have the operator. And the operator, like we said, was a string. It wasn't in curly braces. It was just in quotes. It's just a string, right?
Right.
And we're switching on it. We all remember the switch? Does everyone remember the switch?
Yeah, it's like if else.
Yeah, it's like a big if else, right? But it's a little bit more terse. Right here, that's where that string's coming into play. Now, a cool thing about React is you've probably seen this before, but a little refresher. If it's just a literal string, you don't need to put it in curly braces. You can just assign a literal string in quotes and you're off to the races. You've got a literal string passed in as a props. And that's pretty helpful. In this case, is there any reason to put it in curly braces? Will we ever have a variable that we're going to want to assign here? Maybe. In this case, we don't. You just pass in the string, you know, cut to the chase, right? No need to make a variable. So we're switching on that operator. If it's a plus sign, nice and easy, we're actually going to plus. If it's a minus sign, we're going to minus. If it's a multiplication sign, we're going to multiply. If it's a divide sign, whatever that's called technically, quotient or whatever, I don't know, then we're going to divide. And then if it's nothing that we can find, we're going to set it equal to nan. Does anyone remember what nan is? Not a number. Yeah, we're going to set it to some garbage, I guess, because why not? So goes through, it decides what this value is going to be, and then we're going to go ahead and return this span element. Okay? So remember how we saw, let's see if it's still up. It should still be up. Remember how we saw these crazy fonts and stuff? They're all weird. Who knows what's going on here? These are just spans. And actually, if we look at the elements, and I'm sorry, streamers, I can't zoom in on the Chrome DevTools. You can see if we dig in here, we end up with a span. We have just some text. And we have our span. That's how it's rendering out, right? So we built the value. We create a spam element right here, spam component. Spam. It's not spam. It's span. We set the style, which you'll notice too is a little weird in React. And then we curly braces, right? Close up the tag and we return it. That's how we build dynamically this little calculator routine or whatever. It's not a real calculator because you can't press buttons or anything, but you know, it adds some stuff. It's kind of cool. And it shows how a component is built in real time dynamically with the function, the React function, right? Pretty straightforward. Any questions on this? This one's a little bit more work here, a little bit more going on. You guys all seen the style in React? You all familiar with that? You know how that works? Cool. No more questions on that. Curly braces for the value makes sense, right? We have the let. We're just assigning it right there. And then this is just our value. If you add 2 plus 2 and your operator's a plus, you're going to end up with a value of 4, right? Makes sense. And then you also notice that the font size is set to the value. So that's why that weird 300 one is like gigantic. But if I did 2 and 2, let's change these just to be consistent. And then I go ahead and open up Google Chrome. Oh, look, it rendered again in a crazy tiny, I can't even see that. Wow, that's really small. Yeah, that's two font size. So, yeah, that's an example of how these prompts can change dynamically and how we use these prompts in a more complex way. What'll happen as you start getting into like serious React development is there's some extra libraries on there you can use, and you'll effectively have one component that holds all of the state and all the master prop information, and it's gonna, in its render function, so this function right here that it calls, it's literally just gonna create a bunch of smaller React components and then eventually return one like div or something that holds all of those. And it's a really nice way to build out your app because you'll have just a bunch of small components with just a few props, only a few things you got to worry about. You can take them out, change them, do whatever you need to do, no problemo. So before we move on, one quick thing about this right here, this function, we'll see in a little bit. Some of the React components have a render function. Y'all seen a render function? No? No render function? Okay, well, there's a render function in React, which basically says return what I'm actually going to show as HTML. So if you got some divs, return some divs, in this case, the span. And it's, when you have this anonymous function, this is your render function. So anything you could do in a render, you do here. Now, I'm jumping ahead a little bit by telling you that, but keep that in mind. If you're going to talk about an anonymous React component like this, just say the render function. You know, the React component render function. That's what this is. It's rendering the React component, literally returning HTML from it, right? So again, any questions on anything we've just seen about props? Ben, what's up?
So the double curly braces in the file.
Okay, so Ben asked, what are these double curly braces for here? Because I know I talked about those a little bit and said the first set denotes that we're going to put a literal value in React. Second set right here, my voice cracks a lot. You'll have to deal with it. The second set is saying that we have an object, right? Object syntax. So if we want to see how else this could work, you could do const style, right? We could just copy this in here. And, oh, I deleted a whole bunch of stuff. Same thing. If I open up this bad boy right here, where did I do? Did I close it? I have no idea where the Chrome went. So I think it closed it. But anyway, does that make a little bit more sense? It's just an object literal. It just looks confusing because there's two sets of curly braces, and it's kind of weird. It threw me off the first time I saw it too. What's up, Cody?
You have to use camel case, right? For the styles inside of React.
Yes. So you'll notice too, good question. So Cody asked, do you have to use camel case for the styles? Yeah, you do. So you have font size here. Normally it'd be like font dash size in CSS, right? It's font capital S size. Or if you wanted to do background color, I think you could do background color like so. Maybe red. This probably work, I think. Let's see if I can get this up and running again. Really quick. Boom, I'm gonna run it. Hopefully these come out as red. If not, oh, look at that. Boom, come in as red, right? So when you're thinking about CSS to put in the style, if you want to do style directly because you're building it from something or whatever, it's just camel case of the CSS style properties. Now, granted, we try not to use style, right? We try to use classes. That's a little bit cleaner. But if you have to, that's how you do it. Any more questions? Nope. Cool. Well, Alex will Slack out the solution to that. We have a little bit of some coding you guys are finally going to get to jump into. I know. Thank you for bearing with me. I talked about a whole bunch of stuff, but we're actually going to have you do something now. And it's just going to be a little bit of review of everything we just talked about with props. So he's slacking that out. We'll give you about 15 minutes to work on it, and then we'll talk about it. Cool? Cool.
Okay.
So I know this is a tough activity, but we'll give you a couple more minutes and then we'll go over it. Oops. Is it that's time? Okay. All right. So I know. Did anyone finish? Anyone get this done? Cody, just about finished. Nice. This is a really tough one. So most of you probably didn't finish, and that's totally cool. We're gonna go over it, talk about it a bit, cover some of the stuff that maybe people struggled with. Yeah. So let's look at the final output. This one's gonna blow you all away. Boom. Awesome, right? That's pretty rad. Looks no different than the original one. However, the differences should be in the code. So this assignment was really more to show you how reusable React components can be, right? So one of the things that I was talking about that I really think makes React great is the fact that we can build these components into small chunks and reuse them all over the place without any problem. So theoretically, if you finished, you would have one component that can render all of those cards, right? So let me just blow this up a bit. Whoa, huge. So let's go look at our app.js. So in here, this is an example of maybe how it would look when you're completed, right? So we have one component, the friend card, and that friend card is effectively the same thing as all three of those other cards, but now we're only using one component. Can someone tell me some of the benefits of us having this one component now, as opposed to three? Anyone? Tim? You can make endless friends. It's absolutely correct. Endless friends. All the friends you want. Anyone else? Any other benefits? Professional things like what?
Friend card or
So why is it better now that we have one component, the friend card, that we're going to use instead of 3 components, Mr. Krabs, SpongeBob, Squidward? More organization. That's an excellent answer. That is absolutely true. Anyone else? Any other benefits to this? There's a few. Trent?
For using, so, you know,
Right. Right. Code reuse. That's another great one. Let's give everyone a round of applause. So awesome answers. Great job. Yeah. So code reuse, organization. You can make unlimited friends, no hassle. Makes it really simple to do all of those things. And that's what's really great about React components. They all share similar aspects, similar props, right? And that's a pretty fantastic benefit we get. So if we look at the friend card, we have a whole bunch going on here. It renders a whole bunch of data. Where might we get this data from? Does anyone have an idea of where this data might come from in a real production app? What was that? An API? That's absolutely true. Definitely. Anyone else?
Yeah.
A database? That's another great place you could find it. Yeah. Are there any other places you could use? Right now it's using a sweet little friends.json file, right? And that's cool, but that's probably not what we're going to use in the real world. So API, database is great. Those are 2 awesome answers. User input's another fantastic one, yeah. And maybe you do have a JSON file. Maybe you have a config file or something. Or maybe the server is just producing stuff based off of something else. Who knows? There's a million places where it could come from. It's just important to know that the friends.json is great to have here for testing, and that's a really great way to test. But there's a bunch of ways so you can get the props in here. So let's look at this really quick and go over it. We have our function, our render function, right? Takes in some props. Now, if we go back to our app, we can see name, image, occupation, and these are coming from the friends JSON, right? So nothing too fancy here. And just plugging them in, friends, location, image, name, occupation, all that. All those things are common among those 3 friends we had. It has a class name, right? So we have the camel case. We're not using class anymore. We use class name. I know we went over that last week or whenever we met last. And then we have another inner div with our image in there. And look, here's the props name, right? That's the alt. And then we have the source, just ties to the image URL. Nice and simple there. And then we have another div for the content, which lists out the name, the occupation, the location. And that's how we get those bullet points underneath the images to make it look really nice. And then just normal tags, right? Strong. Anyone know what strong does? Remember what strong does? Bold. Yeah, nice. We have our curly braces for our props to plug in their props name, occupation, location again. I know I've said those 3 a bunch. But yeah, it's just a really great example of how you can take in X number of props, however many props you want, and easily render them in a single component. Now, why do you think the component stopped here? Is there, I mean, this might be an open-ended question, kind of for some discussion. Why did they choose these particular components? Why is it a div? You know, does anyone have any ideas of maybe how you could structure this? Nothing? No? Trying to get some discussion going. Maybe it was a terrible question. It's quite possible. But anyway, a nice way to look at this is we have this one div that's essentially returned, right? It's theoretically 1, because that's the parent div. And then we have some child divs in there that handle the content. 1 for the image, 1 for the list we've got in there, right? And so that's a nice separation. A good way to look at these smaller components when you build them is just find the absolute bare metal minimum you need to build this component, and that's all you should use, right? If you have anything else that has, like, I mean, it's possible you could even take this image out and build an image component. Like, that's cool. You could definitely do that. Is it overkill? I don't know. That's up to you. It depends on how much goes into this image. So there's a lot of ways you could reorganize this. You know, the content here, you could have a content list that could have infinite number of list items if you wanted to. Like, there's other ways you can break this down to make it even more reusable than it would be. And maybe it would look like just a div that had an image and content list React component, right? So Here is another example of how the props work, how you can pass them through from the app. You can see again, they look like attributes, like they're kind of very familiar, but really they get passed into this function. The other thing too is we have a cool way to export a file without having to do a lot of work, right? Can anyone explain what this code does? Anyone have any idea? It exports a default friend card to wherever you want it, right? That is exactly right. Do you know what this default is? Well, we'll eventually send it to the HTML, yeah. But this default right here, that's the friend card, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Because we have that export default, so it comes back with a default value, and we're basically just saying that we want to easily from our app.js, without having to go like component/friend card or whatever, we can just import from the index.js, right? The default value. So that's that same idea of putting an index.js in a directory to get the contents out without having to search through the directory. Right.
Kind of like how we were like bootstrap or
yeah, it's very similar to that. Yeah. So you'll have a tag that's got the link and all that, and this is for the exporting the JavaScript components. But eventually, you get that HTML out, and it builds it into the DOM. Yep, definitely.
Can you export more than one component from one document? It seems like you're just putting everything in its own document.
You can, but it starts to get a little messy, like the typical best practice. So for the streamers, Nikki asked if you can export more than one React component from a single file, right? And the answer is yeah, sure. You could just do export friend card and then export whatever and then export whatever. And then your import in here would have to import all of those things, right? And you could require like any other import export that you would like. The reason why most people tend to do this export default is, one, it's easy for imports. You're getting that component. You don't have to do a lot of work to like destructure it or whatever and get stuff out, or do like my export variable dot friend card or whatever, right? It's just there. And two, the point of the React components is to be very isolated. And so keeping one component, or at least one exported component, per file is a really great way to keep it clean. Now, it's possible you could take, this out, and you're like, hey, I want to make it an image, and you just did like const image thing. Yeah, that's how you spell image, right? And you could return it. No problem. You can do that. And as long as you're not exporting it out, if you're just using it in here, that's cool too. It's a really nice way to organize a single file. But I would really stick to exporting one component at a time, just for best practice's sake and clarity's sake.
And are there other values other than default when you're doing the export that you get from?
If you use export default, so there's a few things you can do, right? So export default is the default value that's coming out when I just export from. That's what I'm going to get, that value. But I can still, even with an export default, do like export, like let's say I have constant. Oh my gosh, sorry, this keyboard is crazy. Like, I know this isn't a component, but I can export name, or even export a function, or an object, I mean, that has name in it, right? Like that's another thing you can do. And then in here, you can do export default, and then name. You can get the name out. So you can export as much as you want in a bunch of different ways, but that default keyword means literally the default value that I exported with the default keyword. So it's just explicitly pointing towards export default, whereas the rest of this stuff, you'd have to like give it a name, give it a variable, whatever you need to do. I mean, you can export functions, right? So that, I think you got to do const. So you can export that function, and then you would import it out. Very similar that we did from name. So, right? That all still works. There's nothing crazy there. Make a little bit more sense? So does anyone have any more questions on this little project we did? Trent, what's up? Right. Do you need an index.js for every component? No. I almost never use this pattern in real life, to be completely honest. Kind of a weird pattern. If you want to have like this folder structure, so see how they have this very well-defined folder structure of everything related to the friend card, CSS, the JS, maybe something else. Maybe I have like a types in there or something, you know, that the friend card component's going to use, and that's how you want to structure it. Then sure, this is a good pattern because you only have to reference this friend card folder to actually get the component out. However, most of the time that's not how it works. I mean, you can do that, it's great. But like for me, I might just have a components folder with friend card JS, title JS, wrapper JS, and just call friend card JS directly. Depending on how you want to organize it. So it's on you. Right. Right. So if I had another one in here, that was like test card or something, and I did some stuff with it, I don't know. We did an export default. I actually don't even think you need to name it on a default. Just do an export default, and it's like some function, right? But you don't necessarily want it to be easy to access. You can leave it out here. And so I can still just get to the friend card by referencing it from app.js like that, by just calling friend card, or I could get my test one out. Friend card, but I'd have to go directly to test card to get it, right? Or, I mean, you could even call friend card directly if you want to, but it just saves you the trouble of having to do that. So the pattern can be useful. Again, if you want to organize your project that way, that's not a bad way to organize your project. It's kind of nice. Everything's kind of kept together, and that's a good way to think about it. But realistically, will it happen? I don't know. It's up to you. Any more questions on any of this? Nope. Cool. Alex is going to Slack out the solution, and then we have another activity that we're going to do for another 10 minutes with called component map. And I don't know what the activity is yet. I haven't read the instructions. So we'll give you 10 more minutes to do that. You got it Slacked out?
10 minutes, yeah. I put the link from GitLab because there's links within that for extra help. And as far as like solutions go, I'll put everything on GitLab at the end of time. Clear up the files here.
So streamers, if you didn't hear him, he's got a link to GitLab up as well. And that link is going to be helpful because there's links inside of the file or inside of the README that you might want to get to. You can't really see them from the markdown he's going to send. So use that link to our GitLab repo to look at the instructions. And then 13, what is 13?
Mental note.
Oh, okay. All right. Did anyone finish the basic? Cody finished the basic? Anyone else finish the basic one? What about the bonus one? Anyone finish the bonus one? Everyone's still kind of this one tough?
I'm still reading.
Yeah, there's a lot there, definitely. Well, let's go over it a bit. I know we haven't had a ton of time to work on these, assignments today, but like I said, we've got a lot to go over. It's supposed to be a Saturday class. So we're gonna go over the basic solution first. Does anyone want to take a crack at what they did? No? Anyone? Yeah?
So I went to the app.js file.
Okay.
And then, well, let's start at the list.js.
Okay.
I did this a little bit tonight.
That's fine. Do you want to Slack me yours and I can compare the two?
Sure.
Slack it into the Tuesday, Thursday class, or the Monday, Wednesday class, and I'll pull it out of there. Ooh, like this. All right, so this one right here, down here, is going to be Cody's solution. All right, so let's explain yours.
Well, I just passed the props, the name prop, the list component.
I see, and then in the app.js, you rendered a bunch of them. Okay, that's a really great way to solve the problem. However, there's another way you can do it too that kind of encapsulates it in the list a little bit better, right? So for anyone who didn't get it, what Cody did is he has like a for each loop or a map or something inside the app.js that takes in all of the different groceries or whatever, and then renders them as an individual list item, right? Which works, for sure works. Another way you can go ahead and do it is you can actually map over the items that are passed in as props. So again, we go back, these sweet props. And if we look at the app.js, we have a list of groceries. They have an ID, a name, whether they're purchased or not. And they're just passed in as a prop, groceries, right? And then we can map over the groceries. Does anyone know what map does? My stream went down? That's black. That's bad. Hold on a sec. Is anyone complaining yet? No.
Yeah, but
Oh yeah, it did.